But one thing that will not be changing in 2024 is headaches regarding content championships. Because we've got our first one of the year, and it is a doozy. Rogue One versus Lord of the Rings: Fellowship of the Rings.
Don't like this. Don't
No,
like this
this
matchup
is.
at all.
I know we've said this a couple of times. This might be one of the worst we've had to deal with. Like, Andor and Return of the Jedi is pretty rough, but
Yeah, but it's like it's tough like when it was that because it was same franchise, but at the same time, because it's the same franchise, you're like, okay, well, yeah, there's always one more favorite in a franchise. This is two great films from two separate franchises, and it's like it just gets too difficult.
yes. But as always, we have 6 categories that are claiming they're going to help us solve this issue.
Mm.
We have personal relevance, how well it has aged, rewatchability, story, acting, cinematography, and visuals.
Rogue One versus Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And as I'm looking here, I'm seeing the word peak a lot on both sides, so this could be fun. Personal relevance, sorry. How would you say Rogue One has affected your life personally?
It's definitely hooked me into Star Wars in a sense. Like it kind of opened my eyes to there is more than just the Skywalker trilogies. There is other things that went on that have great stories, and it kind of opened the gate for filling in these gaps. That I'm now in love with the fact that we're filling in these gaps, and we've had some of the better content out of that. And
Yeah,
I feel like Rogue One started that.
I get
But
you.
then personal relevance of Lord of the Rings, like it's one of my earlier film, like fantasy film, beloved, kind of hooked me into nerdom. This along with Star Wars, it was like it's it's been there a lot longer than Rogue One has. Unfortunately. Even
It's
though they're both great.
it's funny. It's really really funny because I've just double checked. Rogue One came out 8 years ago this year.
Is it that long now?
Yeah, 2016.
Wow.
Before COVID, me and Jenna had been together like coming up on 2 years. I'm like what? I'm 16, 17 at the time. Looking out on the world in front of me as I'm becoming like getting ready to become an adult.
Mm,
And I feel like everyone when they're 16 or 17, they start forming their opinions about big things.
mm.
And like as much as we don't like openly discuss it, our opinions on things make it pretty clear where we stand on certain opinions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So seeing a film about rebellion fresh for the first time at that age, and while I don't claim to have the best media literacy in the world, it's better than the bang average seems to be at the minute.
Mm,
I do remember just sitting there and going, there's a message in here for us. There is something that needs to be considered strongly.
mm.
So like it would be remiss of me to pretend it didn't have huge implications in the way I view the world and the way I've gone on to view the world. And I make no secret that I think it's the best Star Wars film
Yeah.
in the way it manages to artistically express itself with beautiful visuals and the strength of the story itself, the homage to A New Hope with the lack of Vader and Vader, as we've discussed previously, being used more like a horror story villain rather than
Mm.
a superhero villain,
Yeah.
and the power that gives it. I think it is genuinely a masterpiece that if it was not tied to the Star Wars franchise, but was the same story
Yeah.
told in like a World War II setting, I think it would be discussed as one of the greatest films of all time. I genuinely do. If you
Yeah,
take
you could
the
you're probably not
same
wrong
raw
there.
plot
Yeah, yeah.
and push it on something like the Enigma machine,
Yeah.
and this person racing across the Europe with the secret on how to beat Enigma,
Hmm.
I think this film wins Oscars.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah.
I think it was snubbed because it was a Star Wars film.
Yes, I would agree there.
Whereas Lord of the Rings, and I already had this written down, which I could prove if anyone cares. Literally, onto your point, it's the first film in what is largely regarded one of the greatest trilogies of all time, and it single-handedly created an entirely new generation of high fantasy fans.
Yeah.
And as I've said before on the podcast, I've already got Jenna to agree that the Lord of the Rings trilogy is the first thing we watch when we move out in a couple of months' time into our new home. We're going to sit down the first weekend we really have a chance in our sofa in our new home, and we're going to watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Mm.
And as I'm sitting here, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put together a spreadsheet of all of like the films I love as a nerd, and I'll get Jenna to help with films she loves because she has a couple of films that I don't particularly like, but she adores.
Hmm.
And we're going to put a spreadsheet together. And in our like first year in our new home, I want to work through all them so that like they are now attached to a new place and a new memory, and I can see them with like almost fresh eyes in a new place.
Yeah.
And Lord of the Rings is, while I've not watched it as recently as I wish I could, purely because of the time commitment,
Hmm.
I adore that franchise, and I've got a feeling when I do get around to watching it again in my new home, it is gonna further ingrain itself in my heart in a way that I'm not fully aware of yet.
Yeah.
How well have they aged is the next question.
I mean, both have aged phenomenally. Just one's
So
had
well.
longer to keep aging better than the other.
A
Which,
10-year-old whiskey and a 25-year-old whiskey have different prices for a reason.
yeah, it's tough because it's like I feel like Rogue One has also had a little help from all the added. It was great, don't get me wrong, and it's aged great. But the fact that we've now had even more Star Wars stuff and we're getting Andor and things that are out, that added context makes it feel even better. Whereas like Lord of the Rings on its own has just aged so well.
Yeah.
Just alone. Just
I
just
I
chilling.
I I think I've mimicked your exact feelings here. It's Rogue One's aged incredibly well, especially with the addition of Andor and
Mm.
supplementary content. And then for Lord of the Rings, it's aged like an expensive fine wine. Everyone wishes they could watch Lord of the Rings for the first time again. Every couple of months, you see one of them Twitter threads of like, "Oh, what one game, what one show, what one film do you wish you could experience for the first time?"
Mm.
And the comments are always flooded with people going, "Lord of the Rings trilogy, Lord of the Rings trilogy." It is always one of them things that people want to be able to experience for the first time again.
Yeah. It's just such good.
Rewatchability might be one of the strongest rewatchability duos we've had in the
Yeah,
content championship.
I do feel there is a leaning one way. I do think one is somewhat easier to rewatch than the other, purely
There is
because of.
one that is much easier to rewatch.
I will say, I very nearly happened to watch Fellowship of the Ring on New
Oh,
Year's
really?
Eve. I went looking to watch it, but it's not on any streaming services.
Yes. That I can't believe it's not on any streaming service.
And I was like, well, I'm not paying to rent it. I have it on Blu-ray, but I haven't got the energy. I'm not going to dig out my Xbox or Blu-ray player to set it up on like, because I was on the TV downstairs and I was like, fine, we watched The Hobbit instead. We watched part one of The Hobbit instead. So I got the vibe of it, but it's like Rogue One, watch it on its own. You can enjoy it. You understand. You don't necessarily need to go on and watch the original trilogy.
Yeah.
You watch the first Lord of the Rings, and well, like you've got to watch the rest of it. Like I've watched the first Hobbit, and I already in my head, I'm like, okay, I need to watch the next one at some point. It opens the door for a bigger commitment.
Yeah. And also, being men of culture that we are, we're not watching the standard edition of
No,
Fellowship.
no.
We're watching the extended cut,
Oh yeah,
which is 3.5 hours.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Normally, if someone says, "Do you want to watch a film at like 10 o'clock at night?" You're like, "Oh, 2-hour film, you're cutting it a bit fine. It's gonna be like midnight by the time we're done." Someone says, "Do you want to watch Lord of the Rings Fellowship at 8 o'clock at night?" And you're like, "It's gonna be nearly midnight by the time we're done." It's a time commitment, and don't get me wrong, it's worth every second. But that's why rewatches of it are so scarce,
Mm-hmm.
because you do. It's one of them few films that, even though I've seen it before, I'm like, no. If I'm sitting down to watch this, we're sitting down and watch it. I'm locked in. Whereas Rogue One is like 2 hours. Yes, there is obviously a lot of supplementary content, but the story itself is so well self-contained
Yeah,
that you can just watch
yeah,
it by itself.
you can. And I mean, even when Andor's finished, you could watch Andor all the way through into Rogue One and probably still be less time than watching the whole trilogy of Rings. So,
story.
Mm.
This is what I've written for Lord of the Rings.
Go on.
Masterpiece. Lord of the Rings is literally one of the greatest stories ever told. I don't think that's an outrageous or a hyperbolic statement. It is a bedrock for a lot of high fantasy. I think it is the most accessible of that genre of like big, expansive high fantasy. It's timeless.
Mm-hmm.
The book came out in like 1912 or whatever. Or sorry, The Hobbit came out in 1912, and it is still just so deeply ingrained in pop culture. Even still, you get people calling people who are short hobbits as a joke.
Oh yeah.
Like, what else has that kind of staying power? It's crazy. I think it's such a big piece of pop culture that people don't even realize it's pop culture anymore. It's just culture. Because it's been pop culture for 30 years with like the films and stuff.
Yeah.
25 years. It's kind of now so built in that it doesn't even feel like pop culture anymore.
Yeah,
I guarantee you have got children who are like 13 years old calling their short mate a hobbit, not knowing that
just
it's
because that's from that film that that book that Dad read me.
Film. They probably don't even know it's from a film. They just
Possibly
know it means a short person.
Yeah, true.
And like Gollum and stuff like that. It's so deeply ingrained. But on the flip side, and I know this is my opinion, but these are always my opinions. It's my podcast, or our podcast. When I say I was talking to a listener, I wasn't talking to Holly. This is very much a shared ownership podcast. Jesus Christ. Drama alert. But in my opinion, it is the absolute peak of Star Wars. The Force is there. It's alluded to. You get to see the Force in a new way with Donnie Yen's character and the way he interacts with the Force. And you've got this kind of espionage, but rebellion, and you feel tiny against this big entity, but the indomitable human spirit fights against it. It is such good storytelling. And it goes back to what I said earlier on. If this story was just changed the settings and the name slightly, I think this wins Oscars. And it's snubbed purely because of the allusion to it being in Star Wars.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not saying I think it's better written than Lord of the Rings. That would be fucking absurd. But it is, in its own right, stunning.
Yeah, it's such a difficult comparison because it's like you say, Rogue One is such a well-contained story and written in such a way to literally, it's written to answer one question, but it's written so well, and it's written in such a there's so much depth to it when there didn't need to be necessarily.
Yes.
And it's like it's a very well written reason for one thing happening, and it made for a great story, made for a great film. But then you got Lord of the Rings. There's a reason that like that trilogy of books is so loved by so many people, because it is an incredible story. And it's like, and Peter Jackson did such a great job at turning those books into the films.
Yes.
And it's like, it's just, like you say, it is like pure nerd culture and into high fantasy. Like it's everyone's gateway into that world
Yeah.
because of just
I
how good
I
of a
ch-
story it is.
I challenge you to find someone who's a fantasy fan under the age of like 30 who doesn't adore the Lord of the Rings films. There will
Yeah.
be some, of course there will. It won't be easy to find them though. They're
Yeah. Well, we've got a freeze.
horizontal.
Hello?
Are we back?
We are. I don't know what
Awesome.
happened there.
Yeah, you'll be able to find some who don't like it, but they'll be
Hmm.
few and far between.
Yeah.
Um, Acting. All that can be said about this Lord of the Rings film is wow. Just wow.
Yeah.
The cast is so good. All of the casting decisions made were brilliant. All of the
Yeah.
actors became one with their characters. Elijah Woods, Orlando Bloom, all of them, such
Hmm.
good work. And then on the side of Rogue One, I don't think it's outrageous to say it is the best acting in any Star Wars film. I'll hear arguments about any Star Wars project because of Andor,
Hmm.
but actual acting in the films, because of how much more serious the story is, and like they have to worry less about the Force and stuff, they can be more serious.
Yeah, I'd say for Star Wars film, I can't disagree.
And Mads, he
It's true.
came into the Star Wars universe. He'd never even watched Star Wars before agreeing to do Rogue One, which is crazy when you remember who his brother is.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I don't disagree there. The acting in Rogue One for Star Wars film, probably the best Star Wars film.
It's so good that I will not be surprised, and this is purely speculation. I won't be surprised if there are people who gave other Star Wars films a chance because
Mm.
of the quality of acting and story in this, and they're like, "Wait, this is Star Wars?"
Yeah, there'll be people that watched Rogue One and then went on to actually watch more Star Wars
Yeah,
stuff. But then you have got like the just like you said, the cast of Lord of the Rings, Ian
McKellen.
McKellen,
Yeah, it's it's it's
Gandalf.
so crazy. This is why this is like the quarterfinal because these films are absolute
Yeah.
juggernauts in all categories. Cinematography. Oh,
Also a
so
difficult one again.
I am aware of personal biases here.
Yeah.
I think there were more films made to be beautiful around the time of Lord of the Rings compared to Rogue One.
Yes.
I feel like by the time we get to Rogue One, a lot of films had this kind of, it's not the right word, but this kind of beige, bland, just kind of film look
Mm.
that wasn't anything special. And then Rogue One came and reminded us that cinematography exists and here are these beautiful shots. They took like iconic style shots of Star Wars
Mm.
and then just turned the prettiness factor up, and the lighting and everything is gorgeous.
Mhm.
And I do think that I prefer Rogue One over Lord of the Rings in this category because Rogue One did it when there was a vacuum of it. And I do understand that Lord of the Rings is also stunning and beautiful, but it did it in a time when more films were stunning and beautiful, so it doesn't feel as special.
I It's so difficult. Rogue One is what I would class the start of what modern Star Wars looked like. It took the best of Star Wars, the types of shots, the whatever, and just like you said, made it prettier, made it cleaner, made the like they moved into using really good CGI. Like everything had this extra polish.
Do you know what it is? We've seen this like the iconic kind of Star Wars shot of a planet where it like pans
Mm.
onto the planet, and they always looked cool and they were fun shots. But what started in Rogue One was it gave you that feeling of, wow, that's a planet.
Mm,
It gave you this feeling of like when you see them really high quality pictures of the Earth from space, where you're like,
yes.
wow, that's the Earth. They found a way to capture that where previous
Mm,
Star Wars films hadn't. They're like, wow, that is such and such a planet, and you're like, that is there. That is, wow, how stunning are planets. Which
yes.
I know a lot of people don't find planets that crazy, but like seeing a really high quality picture of a planet does blow your mind a little bit. It's like, wow, we're so tiny and insignificant. That's crazy. And they
Mhm.
managed to capture that.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. But then Lord of the Rings, I think for how beautiful it looks, and knowing, like, when you are someone who watches the extended trilogy, you then watch the behind the scenes to know what sort, like, and Peter Jackson talks about, like, the budget and the, like, how taped together situation that was during the filming of the first one to make a film that looked that stunning, because they put the effort in and, like, really put in the hard work to do as much of that practically as physically possible. Just makes it, like, just visually so
I
stunning.
I would give anything to one day. I don't even know if it's possible. I doubt it is, because if it was, it probably already would have been done. I would love nothing more than one day to be able to record the podcast in person in the Shire in
You
New
can go.
Zealand.
You can go.
Yeah, no, but getting permission to sit there and film there and record there is very different. But like, I would love for like, I
Sign a
don't.
Hobbit hole.
I'm just going to assume Peter Jackson owns it. I don't know if he does. I
No,
assume it's kind of just a
don't think he
historical site at
does.
this point. But I'm just I'd love the idea of like this podcast being big enough where we just send Peter Jackson an email. We're like, we'd like to record the podcast in the Shire, and he's like, okay, yeah, no worries.
If that ever
Like
happens,
that would be the coolest thing.
if that ever happens, we are doing it in a Hobbit hole. We are doing forced perspective to make you look tiny and me look like Gandalf. And that is just for
It
the
would
whole,
be
just for the whole podcast.
like, while one day I'd love for us to have like a set that we record in person every week, just because it would be nicer. There are not many like location places I'd love to be able to record in,
Do you want
but
to move to New
the
Zealand
Shire
and just
would
live
be
at the Shire?
awesome.
Just see if we
They've
can
got
live in the Shire.
they've got terrible web in New Zealand and Australia.
Ah,
I just
have you
don't.
not seen Starlink now? It completely covers Earth.
I'm not giving that man money.
I would if it means we can record in the Shire.
for that one day. But yeah, they're both at the end of the day, we're gonna feel like shit because when we choose a better film in each category, it's gonna feel like we're shitting on the other one, and it's not
Well,
that
yes.
at all.
Unfortunately, someone always has to lose.
Exactly. It's not, oh, this is good and therefore that is bad. It's just, this is good and that's fucking great.
Yeah, it's just remembering that this is a bracket and we are
Yeah.
very deep into the bracket now. So unfortunately,
You're gonna get powerhouses.
yeah.
But I do think it's time for us to start totting up scores here.
Okay.
So I'm assuming personal relevance for you is Lord of the Rings and for me is Star Wars.
Yeah.
We're just gonna tie that one off.
Yeah.
How well it's aged, I think, has to be Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I would go Lord of the Rings.
That makes it 1-0.
Mm-hmm.
Rewatchability is Rogue One.
Yeah, I would go Rogue One. Yeah.
Making it 1-1. Story.
I have to go Lord of the Rings.
Go Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
I would concur that is fair. 2-1. Acting. I think it is fair to say that the quality of the ensemble cast for Lord of the Rings beats out the stellar acting performances of the much smaller cast in Rogue One.
Yes, I would say Lord of the Rings.
Which would make it 3-1.
Yep.
Which means I don't feel bad fighting for Rogue One to win.
Ooh, and that's where I kind of disconnected, and we have to just agree that Lord of the Rings is by far the superior. Oh, he's back.
Yeah. I think it's fair to agree Rogue One wins cinematography.
It's so difficult. I would be willing to say a tie for me So whatever you,
I think my argument is when I think of a lot of shots from Lord of the Rings films, I feel like a lot of my favorite shots are in the second and third. I don't think the first has as many shots where I go, wow.
it's so hard to,
Yeah, you think of it as one entity.
yeah.
But I in my head, I think more of my preferred like bits where I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Are like Return of the King, Two Towers.
Probably more likely, yeah.
Which is why I'm more inclined to go Rogue One.
Fair.
Making it 3-2 Lord of the Rings, which I can live with. I
Oh,
don't think
yeah.
I really expected Rogue One to have much of a chance of knocking Lord of the Rings. I
No.
just wanted to give it a good fight because Rogue One deserves the love.